So with each of the kids, what we try to do is to hover over each one and ask this question: what do they uniquely need that only I could give them? Because if they need a ride to Cleveland, you can get there for $20 on an Uber, but to say, like, what do they uniquely need that only I could give them? And some of them just need some time. Some of them need a trip to the mall for some Dippin' Dots. They cost more than drugs, but it would be worth the trip. Some of them need just a partner in crime. They need somebody to jump in with them. But sometimes somebody doesn't need advice. Is usually most time they just need camaraderie. They need somebody to say, "Hey, I'm with you," and not to start bullet pointing.
Hey crew, what's up? It's Adam. You're listening to The Conversation. Today is episode 276, and our guest today is the one and only Bob Goff himself. I cannot wait for you to hear this conversation. Today, wherever you are, just know I'm so glad, I'm so honored you're tuning in. Each week, I do these conversations for all of you, the listeners. Before we go any further though, I want to give a huge shout out to our partners. Each week, these partners help make the conversations possible. They're partners that I know and trust so well, and that's why I want you to know about them as well. Our first partner today is the International Justice Mission. IJM is a global nonprofit working to end slavery and violence around the world. Like, that's an insane mission, and to do so, they partner with local authorities to rescue victims, to arrest and prosecute criminals, and they walk with survivors until they are rescued. And friends, one of the reasons they're able to do this is because of people just like you who give to help make these rescues possible. IJM supporters who give on a monthly basis are called Freedom Partners. My wife and I, we are Freedom Partners, and this group just helps make these rescues possible. If you're interested in learning more yourself or how you can become a Freedom Partner, go to ijm.org. I want to strongly encourage you, go to ijm.org. Our second partner today is Vern Eide. Vern Eide Mitsubishi is a growing employee-owned company that strives to deliver dreams and transform lives. And Vern Eide's goal is excellence in everything they do. And friends, I'm to the point now where any friend that I hear who is looking for a vehicle, I'm like, don't look anyplace else. Go to Vern Eide. I know them. My wife and I have purchased our last 3 vehicles from them. I know them so well. Go to Vern Eide. Friends, whether you live locally, they'll ship a vehicle to you, regardless of what kind of vehicle you're looking for, whether it's Mitsubishi, Acura, Honda, Chevy, GMC, they'll most likely have it. Go visit verneide.com. Again, that's Vern Eide, EIDE.com. Well, in today's episode, I already mentioned it, I sat down with the wonderful, the amazing Bob Goff. Bob is currently one of the most sought-out speakers in the world. He's a multi-New York Times best-selling author. He's a lawyer, and more than that, he is a world changer. But the thing I love about him the most is he's one of the most uplifting and inspiring people you will ever cross paths with, in a way that only Bob can. And when you listen to the conversation, you'll know what I'm saying. In a way that only Bob can. In this episode, he shares about parenting, and he also shares about marriage. We also talk about whimsy. What is whimsy, and how can we pursue it in our everyday lives? On that note, friends, as always, sit back, relax, and enjoy the conversation. So, Bob, we typically hear a person's highlight reel. Are you willing to share about a current unpretty part of your life? Whether it's stress, grief, anything that applies, unpretty part of your life.
Yeah, I think the thing that is, you're trying to kind of pick a lock. You figure out one section of life, and then the lock combination changes. It just does. It's not a result. It can be a result of a couple good decisions or bad decisions. It could be the result of just the passage of time, how many times laps around the sun. So for Sweet Marie and I, we have these grown adults, and they married people and they made people. And so we've got, we're the pastors of a church of 12. So one of the things that is the growing edge for me is learning to be famous with my family rather than known by strangers. And so what we've done is make some systematic kind of changes in that large gatherings that are elsewhere that I've been kind of tapping the brakes on, not because they're great, they sound like a blast, because I love being around people and all that. But to say that legacy piece, to say when I'm in a jar up on a shelf somewhere or a snow globe, there will be what are the kinds of things that you could leave behind that would be actually lasting, that will outlast you. Even this idea of writing books, while I find the process very tedious, it'll be something to lean up against the jar. To say this is a legacy piece. And I don't think you have to wait until your mid-60s to do that. You could do that in your mid-20s. You could just say, hey, where do I want to end up? And so we always say around here, a hope without a plan is a wish. And I don't want to be wishing on falling stars and all that, just to be packed with intention. And then, I'll mess something up. And I try to find new ways to mess things up. I don't want to mess up the same way, repeat the same error. I'll make new errors along the way, but I want to fail trying. I don't want to fail watching. And that's been the difference. So the shift for us has been this one, because there's all these really neat opportunities out there. And everything inside of me wants to say yes, because it's just like I'm geared towards yes. But then I'd say, there's a value to having some porch time that are just kind of around generally home. So if you've tracked some of what I'm doing, we've moved the center of gravity a little closer towards home. We bought an old Young Life camp and fixed it up to be a place where people could come. We bought a little boutique-y hotel camp kind of thing and fixed that up. We're trying to do those things. And I don't need to have a job. I just want to create spaces for people to get better at whatever they need to get better at. So that's it. That would be the reward. That's the strategy. And I hope that people listening, no matter what your age, no matter how many trips around the sun, that you say, okay, so here's my plan. And then you can chunk it up a little bit. You could use F's like faith, family, fun, finances, Ferrari if you want one, philanthropy if you can't spell. But you could chunk it up a little bit and then say, for each of this, which is my going forward plan? So my rub is that I love saying yes to things, and we get people we might pop to mind, and then I'll immediately say, oh, totally, I'm there. Then I have a couple people, Stephanie and some others, that are helpful in reminding me of what it is that I wanted to emphasize. And she said, if you've changed your mind and you want to emphasize that, then let's definitely say yes to it. But if the plan is still what the plan was, then let's just do that. And so not people that hold you accountable, because that feels like somebody there to bust your chops, but people who will hold you close. Because if you've been held close, you get both. Like you have that beautiful thing that emerges in your life. And then you mess up, and people that are the right people will be kind and give some words of correction, but they'll do it in just such a gentle way that's like a tap on a shoulder, not a slug in the chops.
That's so good. I didn't expect you to give that answer. And yet, honestly, that's probably in a totally different way something I'm struggling with big time as well, is having that rub of wanting to say yes and then feeling bad about disappointing people, and yet knowing I'm guilty of saying yes to a whole bunch of things, and then the day arrives and I'm like, why did I say yes to this again?
Yes. And that's such a good indicator. So sometimes people need some certainty they're putting a big shindig together or a really neat gathering, and they need some certainty a year in advance. And we just don't know what a year in advance looks like. And so sometimes we'll adopt somebody else's sense of timing and rhythm and arc, and to say, instead, what actually have I found the best? So when let's say you got to that event that you go like the day before, you're like, what in the world am I doing? And it'll happen to everybody, whether it's, a Bible study that you joined, or a thing, or a men's group or a women's group or whatever it is. that you'll say, why am I doing this again? And to just continually reevaluate. We're picking a lock, and you want to develop this lock picker's touch. And sometimes that comes, if you ever remember opening a bicycle lock where you forgot the combination, you put it under some tension. You just give some tension to it, and then when you're spinning the dials, you'll hear the tumblers. And so I can see the parallels there. There's some of that tension. You're feeling like, Paul, I keep doing what I don't want to do, and I don't get around to doing what I do want to do. So we come by it honestly, but we don't need to camp out in that. What we can do is make some intentional shifts forward. You can even do that in friendships. You can say that there's some people who have been very important, and yet for this season in life, they are going in a different trajectory than I'm at. And you can wish them well in that and don't make a big deal about it, but just you could, there's times to air gap some relationships a little bit and to realize that that's not a bad thing. But you could see in this time, if you're feeling like people are, there's a new dynamic that I don't think it was there 30 years ago, that where people kind of gang up on one another or pile on and all that. And so to just say, you want to be a safe place, you want to be Switzerland, you don't need to do that. And even though you might have a thought, just keep it in your thought bubble. Don't share it. And if somebody says something lame or mean or then just say like, oh, that one slipped out of their thought bubble. Like be a little bit more generous in how you see it. And it's hard at the time when somebody's hurt your feelings. It's super hard. You just go like, but don't just turtle. Don't say, I'm out. Because like most of us could. We could punch out of what we're doing. Just say, I don't need this. Life's too short. And yet we'll lose the opportunity, like kind of Paul to Timothy, to fan the flames of the unique gift that God has given us. And I don't want a bunch of hyenas that go in a pack to scare you off of your this sense of calling that you have. And yet, I don't want our capabilities to limit our calling, because otherwise I'd still be a trial lawyer. So I was actually pretty good at it. But I didn't feel like that was what I wanted to have leaning up against the snow globe.
That's so good. Bob, just a couple of questions. I'm like, what would I personally want to ask you about? So they're going to be very, very specific. I've had the chance of hanging out with your son, Adam.
He's a good egg.
Through Brad Lomenick out at Lost Valley Ranch. What a delightful human Adam is. As the father of 4 kids on this end right now, my oldest is a senior in high school. Any advice on parenting that you would have?
Yeah, I would say this. We use this idea of observation. So we could say, this is my kind of lived experience. So when somebody says, what's your advice? I say, well, this is my experience. And that's been super helpful, both to frame what I'm about to say in terms of like, this is what how much or little I've experienced of that. And then you can decide what weight to attach to that. And you can also use that when you're speaking to people to say, so what's your experience with whatever? There was a guy, I've sailed across the ocean a couple times, and I don't know why to do, because I just hurl the whole way. I can drop 20 pounds like that. Just put me anywhere near the ocean. And there was a guy, we're itching to do another trip across. I thought it'd be kind of fun to take some people, maybe a couple of the kids. And there was a guy that was telling me like, oh, these are the sails you should get, and the food you should bring, the life raft you should get. And he had all these things. And I said, oh, are you a sailor? He says, no, I've never left Ohio. So he had a lot of opinions. He didn't have a lot of experience. And it would just be great to know that. So if somebody's giving you relationship advice, I would just say, hey, tell me about your experience with relationships. Like who are some decade-long friendships? If they have financial advice for you, just say like, so what's been your experience with that? And it's not that you need to be a gajillionaire, but just say like, well, you know, my 3rd bankruptcy, then that isn't disqualifying, but it gives you some great context. And so if we ask people that have advice about faith to just say, hey, tell me your experience with that. Like what's working, what's not working, what's a pinch point? If they're all just blowing sunshine at you saying everything's working, then that would give you a peek at the perspective that they're coming from. And you don't need to decide good or bad, but that'll inform how much weight you give to what's to follow. And so that's what I would say. When it comes to kids, I would say that each of our kids is just so very different. There's like Lindsay Goff. She is like Mary Poppins with grenades. She's just like so full of joy, absolutely fearless, just super kind. She has not thought a cuss word. Like she's just like, she's Mary Poppins. My son Richard is just uber creative. He's just like, so you could give him 3 toothpicks and he'd just come up with something really creative to do that. And then Adam, he's just like, if you can't lose your arm doing it, like, he wouldn't be interested. I didn't think he'd see 30. So with each of the kids, what we try to do is to hover over each one and ask this question: what do they uniquely need that only I could give them? Because if they need a ride to Cleveland, you can get there for $20 on an Uber, but to say, like, what do they uniquely need that only I could give them? And some of them just need some time. Some of them need a trip to the mall for some Dippin' Dots. They cost more than drugs, but it would be worth the trip. Some of them need just a partner in crime. They need somebody to jump in with them. Adam flies this open cockpit biplane because he's that guy. You put a parachute on before you get in the plane, just in case you fall out by mistake. For an Enneagram 7, just the possibility that might happen to me, I was like, I'm in. But sometimes somebody doesn't need advice. Is usually most time they just need camaraderie. They need somebody to say, hey, I'm with you, and not to start bullet pointing. And sometimes people that are coming up that have been around the sun a few less times, they just need permission, they think, and they need us to get out of the way. So that whole idea to just say, we don't empower women. We've got schools in 14 countries, and we don't empower women because we believe women are already powerful. But we have schools where they can get more powerful. And so that just that slight shift from this to this makes all the change. Just say, we're here to help out what already is there, not to bring what wasn't there. And so if you start thinking of your kids to say, like, so what is already there, to start seeing that unique gift that's within them and fan that flame. And so what's my unique role? And as your kids grow up, you can ask them, hey, what's my role in your life? I know, like, in the family tree, there's all kinds of biology going on and DNA getting transferred. But besides that, what would be my best role now for you in this particular circumstance? They say, man, we just need you to whatever. But I would say, as our kids have achieved adulthood a long time ago, asking these kind of honest questions, not assuming things about what your role is because you think that's the role you're supposed to play, but ask them to be like co-agents in that. Like, help me figure out my role.
Gosh, so good. Okay, same question on marriage. So my wife and I have been married 20 years. What's your experience when it comes to marriage?
Amazing. Yeah, 38 years, 3 months, and 12 days. I'm counting up. I think she's counting down. But I would say the idea of remembering. Just remember that. It's not like a parlor trick. I just remember. And each day, I know I'm within a day or two of the last number. And so that idea, remember, faith guide your steps. This idea of remember is in the scriptures 8,670 times. And I just remember that the idea of looking back to remember those things. And then also to stay present. Like, where are we right now? Like, just kind of self-assess where we are. We're in this time of this transition, and I'm not feeling the gears grinding, but it can kind of feel sometime, maybe for you as well, that it's like you're Pinocchio and everybody has a string except you. And so to come up with strategies so that you could feel a little bit more in control of the things you'd like to control. So my friend Stephanie sends me every evening what I'm doing tomorrow. And so I don't look on the calendar tomorrow. I just keep my feet planted in today. And then knowing that I've got a friend who knows what tomorrow is going to bring. It ain't just Jesus, it's Stephanie as well. They're sharing that. And then so she'll tell me what is tomorrow. And that's really great because then I'm not thinking about the next day and the next day. I'm just thinking, if you ever went to a dinner party and somebody's looking over your shoulder at the next person, that's what it feels like. You break eye contact with today and you're taking a look at tomorrow because you're so wrapped up in that, and then you miss being present. So coming up with some systems, you know your tells, right? If I was a poker player, I'd be lousy at it. If I've got like 5 of a kind. Actually, that's where you get shot because you'll only end up with 4. But I would be all smiles if I had a really good hand. I like, oh, my ear wouldn't twitch or something. I'd just be like, so know your tells. And then when you get a little bit uptight, what are your tells? That I start becoming distracted. I start becoming listless. When I'm feeling the pinch of things financial, that this is the tells that I have. And then come up with a strategy for those. I tend to be like pretty like upbeat guy, and indeed am, but I'm also like there's this layering. I'm really insecure in areas as well. Mike Foster, in this terrific book, he has 7 Primal Questions. He would identify me as the guy that would say, like, am I wanted, right? And so I wear a mood ring. I got it for like $15 on Etsy. And so it just turns colors. And so Sweet Marie and I will talk about what color my ring is. As you say, what does that feel like? And I'll say, well, you know, it feels like this, that. So if you start telling people how you feel, instead of just talking about where you are physically, because that gives you you could be married to a travel agent and know where you are, but to say like how it feels where you are. So we de-emphasize where I am, and Sweet Maria will drop me off most mornings at 5 something in the morning at the airport, and we never talk about where I am, nor when I'm coming back. But we talk constantly throughout the day about how she is and how I am. And so you could just do it, know your tells, and then come up with a way around it. I wear a Mickey Mouse watch. I've been wearing this thing for 30 years. And it's like a $20 watch. But if you ever walk into a room, maybe some meeting where people are anxious about something and nobody's smiling, I'm like, me and you, buddy. If he's smiling, I'm smiling. So know your tells and then find some workarounds. And the great workaround would be if I'm feeling anxious or I'm feeling like attacked or somebody says something mean to me, a workaround would be, let me have a trusted friend stand between me and whatever all that is, because what I'll do won't be the best form of the argument. It'll just be an argument. And I don't want to argue with people. I love that scene in A Bug's Life where the fly goes in the tent and he says, I only have one day to live and I ain't spending it here. And so that's why I quit being a lawyer. I don't want to argue with anybody anymore. I don't want to argue theology. I don't want to argue about like who's in Pennsylvania Avenue. I don't want to argue about that stuff. And it doesn't mean I don't care. It just means I don't want to argue.
So chasing whimsy, what is whimsy and how do we chase it?
Yeah, let me tell you what it is not. Sometimes people think of whimsy as, confetti and goofy and all that, and meaningless. Like the whimsy is just this flight of fancy. And it is not that. It's actually, I would characterize it as a strategic whimsy. That I'm a pretty fun guy on the surface. And so if you want to go have some fun, I'm like, that's where I live. But underneath that is a mile of strategy. Like I know why I'm doing, not manipulative strategy, but it's just I've vetted it. I know exactly why I'm doing what I'm doing. And this idea of like if you catch whimsy, it's like catching a bubble on a wand. When you blow it, you catch it. There's something that's loaded with intention. So whimsy isn't something that just kind of happens like, oh, wow, there's a leprechaun. Let's go where he's going. But instead to say, would this be purposeful? Will this be lasting? And how can I bring people along? How can I address some of our felt needs for each of us and all the inconsistency we have, and then approach life with some joy? there's a person named Diogenes. And Diogenes was actually the founder of cynicism. And a modern day cynic should be like, oh, it'll never work, or don't trust them, or they're whatever the name, narcissist. Everybody's a narcissist. So that's what a cynic would do. But Diogenes wouldn't. And he was the founder. Diogenes lived in a water barrel. He lived a little bit apart from society. He made his own clothes, as did all the cynics. They wanted to be adjacent to society. They didn't want to be necessarily swooped up in what society was saying. And he would walk through Athens at high noon every day with a lamp held up and lit. And people would say, Diogenes, what are you doing? He said, I'm looking for virtue. Isn't that beautiful? So this old school cynics, like, sign me up. I'm that guy. I'm an old school cynic, except I'm not taking pot shots or saying snide things or snarky remarks about things or cautioning everybody, these guys are out. You never trust anybody where they're vulnerable, or like, there's just this negativity got in the air system from a couple different directions. And I want to be looking for virtue. And people who are chasing whimsy, who are catching whimsy, have caught up with this idea that we're looking for virtue, even in the places that doesn't feel very virtuous, even in our own parts of our lives that aren't virtuous. But say, can we see something redemptive in that? So somebody that is actually about this idea, they're not just putting happy faces on things. I'm dating myself, but we used to collect, when I was a kid, these empty Coca-Cola bottles. And I didn't grow up in the church. I didn't know anybody who went to church. But at the bottom of these Coca-Cola bottles, it said redeemable 5 cents. And we collect these bottles, and you go to the grocery store and you get a nickel for an empty. And at that, when this idea of redemption came up in the context of faith, they could understand that it's actually worth something. That's what somebody who's looking for virtue will do. They'll hold up that lamp, and they won't hold up somebody's failure. They'll say, is there something that is worth something that'll come out of it? And that's the promise of Scripture, that some of these things, even our worst failures, my biggest screw up, that there might actually be something redemptive. There might be something valuable. And I want to be open to that. I want to be looking for that. I want to be looking for that in the most difficult relationship that I've encountered, where you don't feel like misunderstood, you feel betrayed in that relationship. And yet, can you still hope to see virtue in the beautiful things that same person is doing in other areas and in other people's lives, and to celebrate that, like, wow, instead of thinking about the pain, you can just think about all of the purpose that they're releasing in other people's lives.
Bob, I love that picture, and I honestly, I've interviewed you several times before. I've read your stuff. The strategy part of that is like a new thought for me. Can you explain, just as an example, what it's looked like to chase whimsy in your life? Like just one example that kind of combines those two things. That's really cool.
So, yeah, I bet it was 22 years ago we started a school in Uganda. They were in the middle of a civil war and all this. And we told 400,000 young people who are out of school, you can come to our school for free. We'll feed you. We'll teach you, whatever. And 9 kids showed up. I think 8 of them didn't want to be there, but they're like, wait, I don't have anywhere else to go. So, but then it was like 19 and 29. And now we just got back from Uganda, and there was a graduation. 1,500 kids were walking around in their little unis and in 70 buildings. And this is because there's a lot of people that decided that they want to be helpful and all that. And so we started thinking this is where whimsy would take you. We wanted to go from diapers to doctorate. So we started this university, and it's not like 3 shacks in a row with a cardboard sign that says university. These would be like 3 or 4 story buildings. I mean, it's like a legit thing, which is nuts because my worst subject in school was school. But I thought, wouldn't it be great if we had a giraffe, like a zoo? And I thought of giraffes because I wanted something that didn't bite people and would be hard to lose. And so the person that owns all the giraffes is the president. He has 3,760. That whole idea of, well, how could we go and get our university made and then also the giraffes? And I know his wife. And so we're sitting with her and then we're talking about giraffes. We're not talking about universities because giraffes are a lot more interesting. And she ran across, she's 76. She ran across, got her husband, dragged him back. And for the next hour, we talked about giraffes. And then he turned to the cabinet member in charge of education. He said, make this happen. Then he turned to the person in charge of wildlife and he said, I can part with 6 of these. And then that is what a strategic whimsy would do. And they're shipping them to us standing up. Fortunately, there's no low bridges in Uganda because otherwise you'd need a giraffe chiropractor. Like we would have some bent giraffes. So this is what whimsy would be. Let's plant fields of tulips or something. We can run through them. And that would be fine. It'd be pretty. And then the sun would come and the tulips would wilt and then it would go away. But say, what if we did something lasting? But what if we did it with that extra little twinkle of something that would actually, I want a kid living in a hut to look at a school and say, I could go to that primary school. I want a kid in a primary school to look right next to him and say, I want to go to high school. I want that kid in the high school to look at the university and say, that is 200 yards away. I want that. And I want everybody in the community to look at a giraffe that they've heard about. They will never go on a safari to see. And I want to say the giraffes have returned. And there's something that's whimsy. And at the university would be fine without the giraffes, but it'll be way better with them.
I love it. What does that look like? How can I begin to do that in my everyday life?
Yeah, don't go across the ocean because you won't find that anywhere in the scriptures. Like Paul got shipwrecked and Jonah got eaten. So I would go across the street. I would just say, if you can't make it happen at the end of your block, don't talk about going to the ends of the earth. That doesn't rule out doing things elsewhere, but why don't you make it happen today across the street? Make somebody a pie. If they don't want it, I do. I could get you the address in the show notes. But what if we just think of really practical things? Don't ask people today, like, how are you? Because then they're going to say, fine, how are you? And then you'll say, fine. And that's how we roll in North America. But to say, what does it feel like to be you? And let me think while you're thinking about that, let me tell you what it feels like to be me. 100% anticipation and about 80% insecurity. And so what I'm doing is I'm also always toggling between, is this my insecurity speaking or is this my anticipation? Is this my fear talking or have I given the microphone to hope? And so as you're explaining that in just a few words, now you're having a real life conversation. No emojis needed. So there's something beautiful about that. And knowing our tells, a little quarter of a twist from here to here, and we're having these beautiful conversations. And then we're going a little deeper. And if you flubbed, you could just say, the only words I can access right now are not the best ones. And it's like the stupid shelf is just like right here, right at waist level. And there's all kinds of stupid things to say. And I want to reach up a little higher, but I got to find a step stool because right now I'm just seeing the stupid shelf and I don't want to say something that will live on beyond this conversation. So let's talk tomorrow at dinner. Yeah, that'd be great. Let's do that. I'll find some better words.
So good. Last question I got for you, Bob. I feel like right now our world is serious, jaded, kind of angry. Even Christians, and not just Christians, even myself, I find myself so serious sometimes. It's like, why am I so serious or intense? What do you think we're missing specifically as Jesus followers when it comes to chasing whimsy? Like, is there something that we're missing, or maybe it's just something that just needs another, like a little tweak, like you've kind of been mentioning? Anything specific that comes to mind to that?
Yeah, and again, you don't need a Bible verse for everything, but sometimes if faith guides your steps, it can be orienting. And so I'm thinking about Paul talking about Timothy behind his back. He said, I don't have anybody like Timothy. He's a guy who takes a genuine interest in other people's welfare. That's in Philippians 2:20. And again, you don't need the return address, but sometimes it can be helpful to go there and reflect on that a little bit. Let that wash over you. So take a genuine interest in other people's welfare. To say it's not about me and how I'm feeling, it's about my neighbor because they're probably feeling some of the same anxiety.
Yeah.
And to say, how can we approach them in a way that won't be disruptive or kind of rip the Band-Aid off. I have a neighbor down the way from us, and she comes walking along the bay. And I hadn't seen her in several weeks. And so I'm a pretty enthusiastic guy. And so I ran out to her and I called her name, and she immediately collapsed and had this grand mal seizure because it was just too much for her. And she's got some things going on medically that cause that to be too much. And so what I've learned to do is to take a genuine interest in her. When I see her, I go up and say, hello, it is really good to see you today. Isn't it a pretty day out? It just gives me so much joy to see you walking on the path. And would you mind if I walk for the next 30 feet with you? Would that be okay? And so I just like it's about reading the room, taking a genuine interest in other people. It's not just saying, so what'd you do yesterday kind of interest. That's what you can get on social media. But to say, what do they uniquely need? And some people need you to chill out. So get a puppy. Like you should, instead of being, just try to housebreak that thing. I mean, the only thing my puppy ever missed was the lawn. So part of this is to be just so attuned. And yet, even then, we mess up all the time. I was just, whatever, at the end of the summer in Pennsylvania with this group, there's probably 1,200 guys in this gathering. We had what I thought was a really great conversation. I said, everybody up on your feet, throw an arm around the guy next to you. Let's like kind of hug it out as we wrap up this time. And nobody did it. So I'm thinking, I didn't need to be more enthusiastic. So they up on your feet, everybody throw your arm. And I realized these are all Amish. And they don't hug it out. It was a room full of beards, no mustaches. And so I hadn't read the room. And so this would be my hope for me. And somebody can decide whether that's a hope for them, that I'd be really insightful in understanding what's really going on. And sometimes what is said is not what's really going on. That you think you're talking to somebody's anger, but you're actually talking to their insecurities. Whoa. That you'll see somebody talk about something, watch out for these people, when really what might be going on is something different. I'm not trying to get up in their head. I'm not trying to get up in their grill, but I want to read the room so that I'm not reacting to the person you think you're talking to. You're actually talking to the argument they had with their spouse right now. And so that would be the hope, that we could give enough grace that we could just assume that their life is as conflicted and troubled and laced with insecurity as mine is, and we can just cut them some slack, and then maybe not go to the big pinch point. Maybe I don't need to run up to somebody with arms waving. If they just need a good friend, and so. But then sometimes people just need somebody happy in their life, and that we could come with authenticity, so we aren't a caricature of who we are. Like if I'm always Bob the happy guy, when I'm actually really, introspective sometimes, you get a little bit sad, so that we could be authentic enough to find the words to say, what's it feel like to be you? And while you're thinking about that, let me tell you what it feels like to be me. Feel this tension between being optimistic about so many things and deeply saddened by other ones. And yet I want to operate in this hope arena. I'm having trouble getting there. I can usually find my way, but if you lose your car keys, what you do is you say, where was the last place I saw those? And you return to that place. And so that would be my hope for people. If you've lost some of your hope, if you're feeling either abandoned or betrayed or whatever, say, when was the last time that you felt embraced, enjoyed, hopeful, and return to that. Find your hope again, find your car keys again, and then let's get back to the important work of building that rocket ship that's your life.
Well, friends, I hope you enjoyed Bob. My gosh, that conversation, there was several times where I'm like, I'm not really sure where he's going with this answer, and yet he landed the plane every single time. Huge shout out to you, Bob Goff. I love you and appreciate you so much. Thanks to our partners, the International Justice Mission. Go visit ijm.org, and Vern Eide. Go visit verneide.com. Lastly, thanks to all of you who listened to the conversation. I am so incredibly grateful.